Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive? Today, we're tackling covalent bonds.
Yeah, those fascinating forces that pretty much shape everything around us.
And we're going deep, using notes straight from an IGCSE chemistry course.
That's high school level for most folks out there.
Exactly, so whether you aced chemistry or barely scraped by.
We're breaking it down in a way that anyone can understand.
Right. So covalent bonds, what's the deal? Why should we care?
It's all about stability. Atoms, especially nonmetals.
Like oxygen, right.
Yeah, they're always trying to get a full outer shell of electrons.
Ah, like those super chill noble gases.
Exactly. And covalent bonds are their ticket to that electron bliss.
So they share electrons to get there.
Precisely. It's like teaming up to complete a puzzle.
Makes sense. But hold on, isn't that kind of like ionic bonds too?
Ah, good catch. But there's a key difference.
Okay, lay on me.
Ionic bonds are about transferring electrons, like a full-on handover.
But covalent bonds are more about sharing, right?
You got it. They're all about finding that sweet spot.
Where everyone gets a piece of the electron pie.
Exactly. It's like a molecular co-op. Everyone chips in to achieve a lower energy state.
Low energy state, huh? Sounds pretty zen for an atom.
It is. When they share those electrons,
They hit peak chill.
you could say that, they form a new molecular orbital with lower energy than those solo atomic orbitals.
Okay, starting to see how this works. But wait, you mentioned different types of covalent bonds.
Oh yeah, sharing isn't always a 50-50 split, you know.
Yeah.
We've got single bonds.
Like in hydrogen.
You got it. Then there are double bonds, like in oxygen.
And even triple bonds.
Yep, think nitrogen. Super strong.
Makes sense. Nitrogen gas in tires needs to be tough. Or think about the atmosphere. Tons of nitrogen up there.
Right. It's fascinating. But before we get too far,
We need visuals.
diagrams. Remember dot and cross diagrams from school?
Oh yeah, those things. They show us which electrons are doing the sharing, right?
Precisely. They make it super clear how those electrons are interacting.
Like a map of the electron action.
Yeah, exactly. Let's take water, for example.
Classic H2O. 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen.
Right. Each hydrogen shares one electron with the oxygen.
Creating 2 single covalent bonds.
Right. And what's great about these diagrams is
They show the difference from ionic bonds.
spot on. No mistaking those shared electrons for transferred ones.
Super helpful, especially when you're first learning this stuff. So we've nailed the bonds themselves.
But how do they actually shape the materials around us?
Right, like water is essential and plastics everywhere.
Is it all thanks to these tiny bonds?
Sounds kind of wild, but maybe.
It really is. The type and strength of those bonds.
Along with how the atoms are arranged.
Exactly. They dictate the substance's properties. For example, substances formed by these bonds.
Those are called
Simple molecular compounds, they tend to have low melting and boiling points.
Oh, true. Water's a liquid at room temperature, but other similar-sized molecules are gases.
It's all about the forces between the molecules.
Not the covalent bonds themselves.
Right. Covalent bonds are strong, holding atoms within a molecule together.
But the forces between different molecules.
Those are weaker, and we call them intermolecular forces.
Okay, got it. So water's liquid because the forces between water molecules.
Are weaker compared to the strong covalent bonds holding those hydrogens and oxygen together within a single water molecule.
Right, like a strong inner bond, but weaker outer connections.
A great way to think about it. But there are different types of intermolecular forces too.
Oh, so more complexity, fun.
They have varying strengths depending on the atoms involved.
And the molecule's overall structure.
I'm getting it. We're about to unravel this even further.
Bring it on. I'm ready to dive into these intermolecular forces.
Excellent. That's where things get really interesting.
Okay, so many different forces, all influencing how those molecules hang out together. Where do we even start?
Well, let's tackle dipole interactions first.
Dipole. Sounds kind of like a sci-fi weapon.
Maybe a bit.
Yeah.
These forces happen between polar molecules.
Polar. Remind me what that means again.
Sure. It means the electron density isn't evenly spread out.
Bruh.
Like in hydrogen chloride, HCl.
Ah, yeah, HCl, that rings a bell.
The chlorine atom's a bit greedier for electrons.
So it hogs them, making it a bit more negative.
Exactly. And that leaves the hydrogen end a bit positive.
So it's like a tiny magnet with a positive and negative pole.
You got it. And those opposite charges, they attract each other, creating these dipole interactions between the HCl molecules.
Makes sense. But what about molecules that aren't polar? Do they just, like, drift around, no forces at all?
Not quite. Even nonpolar molecules experience a little something.
Oh, what's that?
We call them London dispersion forces. Weak. but they're there.
London dispersion. That sounds fancy.
It's all about those electrons,
Yeah.
always on the move,
Right.
even in nonpolar molecules, where they're shared equally.
They can still cause a tiny imbalance.
Exactly. A fleeting dipole, just for a moment.
Hmm.
And that can induce a similar dipole in a nearby molecule.
So they kind of nudge each other, even though they're supposed to be neutral.
You got it. Weak attractions, but still important, especially when you've got large molecules or ones with tons of electrons.
So dipole for the polar folks, London dispersion for the nonpolar crew. But earlier you mentioned hydrogen bonding. That sounded like a VIP force.
It is. It's a super strong type of dipole-dipole interaction.
Okay, strong is good. What makes it so special?
It happens when you've got a hydrogen atom bonded to a really electronegative atom, like oxygen, nitrogen, or fluorine.
Oh, so in water, for example, oxygen's pulling those electrons closer, right?
Right. Partially negative oxygen, partially positive hydrogens.
Setting the stage for some serious bonding.
Exactly. That partially positive hydrogen from one water molecule is super attracted to the partially negative oxygen of another water molecule.
They just can't stay away from each other.
It's what gives water its unique properties. For example, it's why water has a relatively high melting and boiling point.
Oh, right. Way higher than molecules of a similar size. We talked about that earlier.
Those strong hydrogen bonds, they need more energy to break. That's why water's liquid at room temperature, while other similar molecules are gases.
Got it. But there's more to it, right? You mentioned water's specific heat capacity, too.
Absolutely. Water's really good at absorbing heat without huge temperature swings.
Yeah. Like oceans helping regulate the planet's climate.
Exactly. Hydrogen bonds are crucial for that. They act like little anchors, resisting the movement of those water molecules.
So they need a lot of energy to break free and start moving faster, and that's what we feel as a rise in temperature, right?
Precisely. Those clingy water molecules are the unsung heroes of temperature regulation.
Wow, incredible. Tiny bonds, huge impact. But let's zoom out for a sec. Remember you mentioned diamonds and plastic. Seem like totally different worlds.
But it all boils down to covalent bonds. Their strength and arrangement, along with those intermolecular forces, determine a material's properties. Take diamond, for example, famed for its hardness, high melting point.
All thanks to those covalent bonds.
It's a network of incredibly strong bonds, each carbon atom linked to 4 others in a rigid lattice.
Like a super strong three-dimensional web.
You got it. Tetrahedral arrangement, super stable. Now compare that to plastic. Also long chains of carbon atoms.
But not just carbon this time, right?
Right, they've got other elements mixed in, hydrogen, oxygen, maybe chlorine.
So how does that change things?
Those extra elements, along with how the carbon chains are arranged, give plastic its own unique properties. Some plastics are flexible, the chains slide past each other easily. Others, more rigid, depending on the branching and cross-linking between those chains.
So it's like the carbon's the backbone, but those other elements in the chain arrangement determine if it's a bendy straw or a sturdy container.
A great analogy, and that's where the diversity of covalent bonding really shines, by tweaking the types of atoms and their arrangement.
Chemists can create a whole spectrum of plastics, tailored for specific uses.
Exactly. But we haven't even touched on giant covalent structures yet.
Giant. That sounds intense. What are those exactly?
Imagine vast networks of atoms, all linked by covalent bonds, stretching out in 3 dimensions. No defined size or shape, just keeps going.
Whoa, like a never-ending Lego build, but with atoms.
Exactly. And just like how different Lego builds have different properties, giant covalent structures do too. It all depends on their composition and those bonding patterns.
Okay, I need examples. What are some of these giant structures? What makes them stand out?
Well, think about graphite, the stuff in our pencils. It's got this fascinating layered structure.
Layers, so not a solid block.
Nope. Each layer is a sheet of carbon atoms arranged in a hexagonal pattern, all held together by strong covalent bonds within that layer.
So like a stack of super strong sheets. But why is graphite so slippery then? And why can we write with it?
That's where the magic lies. The forces between those layers are much weaker than the bonds within them, so those layers slide easily, giving graphite its slippery feel.
Ah. So when we write, we're basically shearing off layers of graphite, leaving a trail on the paper.
Exactly. Those weak forces responsible for both its lubricating properties and its ability to write. Now let's jump to silicon dioxide, also known as silica, the main ingredient in sand.
Sand. Okay, that's definitely not slippery.
Right. Totally different vibe. Silicon dioxide is all about strength and stability. It's got this 3-dimensional network structure. Each silicon atom bonded to 4 oxygen atoms each oxygen to two silicons.
So super interconnected.
Absolutely. Incredibly strong network. That's why sand is hard and has a high melting point. Lots of energy needed to break those bonds.
So we've gone from slippery layers to rock-solid structures. Amazing how those covalent bonds and arrangements create such different things.
Right. The world of covalent bonding is full of surprises. We've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore,
Hmm.
from complex molecules to cutting-edge materials.
I'm ready for more. Let's see where these bonds take us next. Okay, more to explore. You've definitely piqued my curiosity. What other surprises do covalent bonds have in store for us?
Well, we've mostly focused on how these bonds shape the physical world, right?
Yeah, from diamonds to plastic, it's been quite a journey.
But what's even more mind-blowing is how covalent bonds rule the biological world.
Oh, you mean in living things? How do they play a role there?
Think about the basic building blocks of life. Proteins, carbohydrates, DNA. They're all held together by these intricate networks of covalent bonds.
So those bonds determine the shapes of these molecules.
Exactly. And those shapes are crucial for how those molecules function, like enzymes, for example.
Enzymes, those are proteins that speed up reactions, right?
You got it. And their intricate 3D structures, all thanks to those precise covalent bond arrangements, allow them to bind to specific molecules and do their job.
Wow, so it's like a molecular dance, all choreographed by covalent
A
bonds.
perfect analogy. And this dance is happening constantly in every cell of our bodies, keeping us alive and functioning.
I am officially in awe of covalent bonds. From the strength of diamonds to the flexibility of plastic, the life-sustaining properties of water, and now the very essence of life itself.
It's all about that fundamental principle, sharing electrons. It creates bonds that shape materials, drive reactions, and ultimately lead to the incredible complexity and beauty we see all around us.
You know, at the beginning of this deep dive, you asked how the type and strength of these bonds influence the properties of materials. Looking back, it's amazing how much ground we've covered.
We've seen how those bonds give diamonds their unyielding strength and plastics their flexibility. We've explored how they make water essential for life and how they govern those intricate interactions within living organisms.
And all of this started with the simple idea of atoms sharing electrons to become more stable. Who knew such a basic concept could lead to such a diverse and fascinating world?
It really highlights the power of chemistry. Understanding those fundamental principles helps you see them everywhere.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this deep dive has given us a whole new appreciation for covalent bonds.
Me too. But remember, the exploration doesn't stop here. There's always more to learn about covalent bonding, more connections to make, more wonders to uncover.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who want to keep exploring, I'd recommend taking a closer look at the molecular structures of everyday things. From the food we eat to the clothes we wear, covalent bonds are silently shaping our world.
So keep those electrons sharing and never stop being curious.
Great advice. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of covalent bonds. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new topic. Until then, keep exploring.